In Unit 1, which we started a few days ago, up till now we have discussed what basically economy is and what circular flow of money is in an economy. We talked about different types of economies, and then we also talked about three sectors theory, and we understood that there's a primary sector, agriculture and allied activities, then there is secondary sector or manufacturing, and then there is tertiary sector or services sector. Then we also understood the contribution to employment as well as the country's gross domestic product that comes from these three sectors. And we also understood that one major problem with India is that primary activities are not that remunerative. I hope you recall our discussion on how 44% of the people are just generating 16% of the GDP, which means they would also be getting paid less, and in that sense primary activities would not be that remunerative. And we also understood that this is a reason why government is focusing on doubling the incomes of the farmers, right? And we also understood that the major contribution to the GDP comes from the service sector. So this was what we understood in the last session. Today let us talk a little bit about colonialism. You would have probably read about colonialism in your history books in class 7th, 8th or in class 10th. Today we are going to have an understanding of colonialism, and then we would try to understand how it impacted the economy of the country when India was colonized by the Britishers. So what was its economic impact on the country? This is what we are going to discuss in this particular topic. But for today we need to understand what basically colonialism is, and then we'll understand what were the colonial powers and how there was a change in terms of the colonial powers, and how the initial colonial powers then made way for modern colonial powers. So we'll understand this, and this would be the agenda for the discussion today. So what is colonialism? Practice of acquiring full or partial political control over another country, occupying it with settlers and exploiting it economically, right? So what basically is colonialism? A particular country colonizes another country by acquiring full or partial political control. So it could be full political control over the other country, or it could be only partial political control over other country, right? And then this country, the country which has acquired political control in the colony, right? So this country will occupy the colony with its settlers. So it will bring people from its home country and then try to settle them in the colony, right? And that is where the word colony has come up from. Now let me give you an example of what happened in case of India. India was colonized by Britishers. Now please understand that the Britishers made their colonies here in India, and they settled their people here in India. Not only this, they acquired initially only partial political control of the country, but slowly and gradually they were able to extend their political control over the whole of India. And at that point of time, India was not as we know it today. India included the whole Pakistan, it included the whole Bangladesh, it included the whole Burma or Myanmar that we know as different countries nowadays. So the whole Indian subcontinent was colonized by the Britishers, by the British colonialists. So the country which is being acquired or which is being colonized would be known as the colony, and the country which is colonizing would be known as the colonial country. So in our case, the Britishers were the colonial country and the colonies were here in India. And of course you would understand a little while later that Britishers had not only colonized India, but they had also colonized many other parts of the globe, right? So now what does a colonial country do? It acquires full or partial control of the colony and occupies it with its settlers. So it brings people from its home country and then settles them in the colony. And the whole objective is to exploit the colony economically, right? If you would compare the figures from what happened in 16th century to what happened in 1947, right, 16th century or 17th century, beginning of 17th century, somewhere around 1600s, you would find at that point of time India was a major economic power in the globe, and a significant chunk of the world trade was actually at that point of time used to pass through India. So we were contributing a significant chunk in the overall global trade. But now if you compare it with what happened in 1947 and what was our economic condition in 1947, by that time India had grown economically very weak. Not only this, our contribution to the world trade had declined almost 20 times to just under 1%, while in 1600s we contributed almost 20-25% of the world trade. By the time it was 1947 and we gained freedom from the British colonial rule, by that time our share in the world trade had reduced to just under 1%, not even 1%. So this is an example of how we were economically exploited by the British colonialists. Now please understand what basically happened in colonialism. It basically started in the 15th century, right? And the initial colonial countries were Belgium, Britain, Denmark, Holland, France, Russia, Portugal and Sweden. Now please understand, most of these countries, in fact all of them, are part of the European continent. They are part of the Western world, which is considered to be more advanced, more developed, and that was why they had more developed ships. Their ships were technically far superior. Not only this, their armies were far better equipped and they had access to better ammunition, and that was why they were able to travel to various colonies in India or let's say in South America. Not only this, they were able to acquire control of these colonies also. So this was the reason that these countries, which were economically more developed, they were able to also evolve into colonial countries, right? Now please understand, colonialism also had different shades, or let's say different variations. So one was mercentilism, in which the colony could only trade with the metropole. Now what do we mean by metropole? I'll explain this term using an example. In case of India, I said Indian subcontinent, which includes the present day India, Pakistan, Bangladesh and Burma also. In case of India, what they did was, they made it, for example, in case of India, if you are taking the case of India, the colony would be India and the metropole would be the colonial country. So the metropole would be the Britishers. Fine. So this example I have given you to just make you understand what metropole is. So in some cases what happened, colonialists, they forced their colonies to trade with them only, and these colonies were not allowed to trade with any other country. So this was just one form of economic exploitation. Another form of economic exploitation of resources in the colonies. For example, you would find that many resources of the colonies were taken away by the colonialists. In case of India also, many precious things that we had in 17th and 18th century, they were carried away by the British colonialists. Not only this, they forced the Indian farmers, for example, to grow indigo. Now indigo is used as a dye, a coloring agent in cloth making. When you are making clothes, you need to color it, so as dye you use indigo. And now please understand, the Britishers had their factories running in Britain, and these factories, they had huge machines and they were able to produce a lot of products within no time span. So they used to produce a lot of products within no time span. So the Britishers required a lot of dye so that they could color those products. And for that, what did they do? They forced the farmers here in India to switch to indigo farming. So these farmers were forced to switch to indigo farming, and more importantly, now they had to rely on somebody else for their own consumption requirements. So they could not grow wheat, or for example, they could not grow paddy, rice, dhan, and because of it they had to rely on some other for their own consumption, to get food for their own consumption. So this is how the Britishers exploited the Indian economy, and they exploited the resources that we had here in India, right? Then many a times slave trade also used to take place from the colonies. The workers were taken to work in the farms in the colonial country, or maybe in some other colonies. I'll give you example of many Indians who were taken away by Britishers to African continent, and the whole objective was to make them till the field there, to make them do the cultivation there. And why did they do that? Because they also colonized Africa, and there they required a lot of people so that the cultivation could be done in African continent. So what did they do? They took away people from here. So many a times this was termed as slave trade, because these people were akin to a slave. They had to work as per the wish of their master, and they were not adequately fed, or they were also not compensated. So these people were taken away from here, from India, and then they had to work in sugarcane plantations in various colonies in African continent. And that is why these people were known as the Girmitiyas. Now what do we mean by Girmitiya? Girmitiya basically is the corrupted version of agreement. So they signed some agreement with these people, and then they made them come to Africa, wherein they were employed as workers in these sugarcane plantations, right, which were set up by, again, Britishers only, or British colonialists only in these African colonies. So this was the kind of exploitation which was rampant under the colonial rule, right? Now what happened, slowly some other colonial powers emerged. For example, Belgium declined, Denmark, Holland, Portugal declined, Sweden declined, and you would find that Russia, after the 1917 revolution in Russia, they did away with this approach of colonizing some other countries. So they withdrew voluntarily. So those countries which were left were Britain and France, and then they were joined by some modern colonial powers, as I said a little while ago. And these modern colonial powers included Japan, Germany, Italy. Please also understand that Japan was the only colonial power from Asia. Japan is the only country to have colonized other countries, only Asian country to have colonized other countries. Fine. So new colonial powers emerged. And please understand, 1800, by 1800, that is the beginning of the 19th century, European colonies covered 35% of the globe, which means the European countries, European nation states had set up their colonies in almost 1/3 of the globe. So almost 35% of the area was under the management, administration of the European colonial powers. And by 1945, please understand how quickly this area increased. And by 1945, European colonies covered 84% of the globe. So it almost doubled, more than doubled in a span of just 145 years. So this is just to make you understand how quickly colonialism is spread to the different countries across the world, and how quickly so many different countries across the world they became colonies, right? However, what happened after World War II, there were so many factors which worked together and many colonies started gaining freedom, and most of them gained freedom in this time span 1945 to 75. India itself gained its freedom in 1947, so this was the case, and there were so many other countries which were freed from the colonial rule after 1945 in the next 30 years. Now this is just to give you an idea of who the major colonial powers were in 1800, right? Now you can have a look at here. Please understand, this is the Russian influence, area of Russian influence. Now where is the United Kingdom? Have a look, not only the eastern coast but also the western coast, but of course Portugal also had a colony in Goa, right? Now please understand that even in 1900 there were so many parts in the Indian subcontinent which were free from colonial rule. However, they were ruled by princes and kings, so they were princely states. For example, you have heard of the Jhansi, which was a princely state, or for example there are so many other examples which could be called the princely states. So still by 1800 the Britishers had not controlled the whole of the Indian territory. Have a look at Spain. Spain was a superpower, was a colonial power which was in the decline phase, but still they had control over not only the Northern American portion, which corresponds to North America of today and Mexico of today, and they also control almost half of the South American continent. And this is the reason when you go there, you would find in these countries which are there today, you would find that Spanish is spoken very fluently, and Spanish is among the major languages spoken there. Portugal, as I said, was a major colonial superpower, and they had colonized the the eastern part of the South American continent, right? And then please also understand, Ottoman Empire, they were spread across the globe, right? So they were spread across the globe. Now this portion, have a look, this portion was under the control of Russia. So this portion which joins North America to Asia was under the Russian control. This is Asia, Africa, Europe, Australia. So I have given the names of various continents. Now what happened in 1945? 1945, by that time so many colonial powers had declined. For example, you would not find Portugal here. Portugal is now in a very few places in the African continent. Earlier, Portugal had control of almost a very big chunk in the western part of South America, but that is not the case anymore. However, you would understand that United Kingdom emerged as a major colonial power, right? Then France also gained in strength in these years, in last 1.5 years, and they emerged as major colonial powers, right? Netherlands also control parts of Indonesia. So these countries which had recently come up, the British or the French or maybe some other countries, they were all able to increase their influence, right? So this happened, and this is how there was a change in the overall dynamics of the colonialism by 1945, right? These are the names of the continents, and thank you very much. Tomorrow's session will be about impact of colonialism, and we'll be talking mainly about what was the impact on the Indian subcontinent and the Indian economy. So thank you very much.